Can you just give us a definition of what is a bioregulator peptide, and well, what is a peptide, and then what is a bioregulator peptide, and where does the science come and how does it work?
Yeah. Okay. Well, all the things that we might talk about today, whether it be peptides or proteins or even hormones, they're all made up of amino acids. And there's not so many of those, but that's what they are. And when two amino acids conjoin, that's the moment they become a peptide. So it's two or more amino acids. And then it starts to become, how long is this chain? So if it gets long enough, we might start calling them proteins. And even longer, we might start calling them various hormones. Just to give one example, human growth hormone is made up of 191 amino acids.
Wow.
Now that's a lot, okay? That's a lot. And it means one fundamental thing. It means that if you want to get that into your body, you cannot take it orally. It has to be injected because it's just too unstable. However, as that chain gets smaller, other possibilities present themselves. Now, bioregulators are by definition very small chains of amino acids. They are in fact 2, 3, or 4 amino acids, okay? Now, it doesn't mean to say that every single chain, 2, 3, 4 amino acid chain is a bioregulator. There is another terminology to the word, and I'll get into that. And I just want to point out that because they're so small, and because also they're nano-sized, the studies have been done, they are absorbed when taken orally.
That's
because a
amazing.
lot of people, all these peptides need to be injected, or at the very least as a nasal spray, or maybe sublingual if you're lucky. But no, these short chains, these very short chains, can be absorbed through the stomach. So there's a lot of positives to them.
So what the bioregulators, if I understand correctly, go straight into the actual nucleus, the DNA of the nucleus.
That's right.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
Whereas the peptides are sort of more on in the mitochondrial, working on the mitochondria, working in the cell level, but this is actually going right in.
The example I always give is your thyroid gland. So there's our thyroid gland in our necks. I think a lot of us know if you have too little thyroid, it's called hypothyroidism. And many adults have this problem, many.
Yeah.
And it can cause all sorts of problems, your temperature control, your general state of metabolism, how you sleep, etc. And a handful of people, it's less common, but there are people who are hyperthyroid, and they tend to be the opposite. They have a lot of energy, they're too active. Some people refer to them as having the deer in the headlights because their eyes are big.
Their eyes pop out.
Some people think the Mona Lisa was hyperthyroid by looking at her as an but they tend to have the opposite. And yet, if you use the thyroid bioregulator, if you're hypothyroid, it will activate those genes and you will endogenously start producing more thyroid hormones. But if you're hyperthyroid, it will silence them and you'll reduce. It actually puts you within, how should we call it, a normalized. And I think that helps to explain their safety, because if one was to take a thyroid hormone, clearly you're putting that hormone into your blood and it will have an action. The peptides through the genes are instructing the thyroid to activate or to silence, but they're not forcing anything. If one is taking hormone, there's a definite need for monitoring, to have
absolutely
thyroid tests or whatever, because if you keep up too high a level of many hormones, you get what's called downregulation, where you could end up, your own thyroid in this case, could end up stop making thyroid because it says, oh, this stuff's everywhere, we got too much of it. But that doesn't happen with the bioregulators.
Wow.
So that is, I think, one of the most fascinating parts of this technology.
And this is where it's like super exciting, because like we've to date we've had all the pharmaceutical drugs that have come out which have their place and their time, but they tend to be pushing on one pathway, and they're having a lot of collateral damage, for the want of a better description. So things that are unwanted implications. And, the example of blood pressure medication, if you give someone who has high blood pressure medication, it'll drop their blood pressure. But if you give someone who's normal blood pressure medication, it'll make it low. So it's forcing it in that downward direction. So whereas with the regulators, you're just making the body, so it's going a step lower, isn't it, or a step higher in the hierarchy, basically, where the body's like just given the permission or the ability to actually regulate itself. Oh no, he needs more or he needs less of this, and therefore brings it back into balance. And that's a very exciting concept, because, I'm very excited by hormones as well, bioidentical hormones and what they can do for people. I think that they're very powerful, amazing things, but we do need to monitor, because we don't want to be pushing too hard on one way or the other way. Not having hormones in the mix, well, then you're just going to age a lot faster and have all the downsides of heart risk and brain risk and everything.
There's no doubt that bioidentical hormones, particularly bioidentical hormones, are incredibly powerful tools, but they're also very complicated. You only have to look to the work of somebody like Dr. Thierry Hertog in Belgium, who is an incredible endocrinologist, and he has an incredible knowledge, but I think there's handfuls of people like him, because it is very complicated once you introduce, just to come back to the thyroid again, there are 4 principal thyroid hormones. We'll use the T names, T1, T2, T3, T4. And yet some countries only use T4. Some countries
I know. Yep. And
excuse me.
And when, if I look at liver, so extracts like liver extract or adrenal extract, that have actually come from the liver of a cow usually, or a pig or whatever, is that a crude form of bioregulator that's not been refined enough to say it's this or that? But
I have been asked this question before, and in the beginning of my career, and let's be honest, organ extracts were the first big thing in the 1920s and 1930s. Organ extracts were de rigueur, they were the thing. And in my early career, there was a lot of demand for organ extracts, and then it moved on to different things, bioidentical hormones, obviously, in more recent years, and now I think peptides, and other things, but I won't go into those. So yes, I think there is an argument that, obviously, if you, I'm going to forget you, Weston Price. There was a man called Weston Price who many, many years ago went and studied native tribes, many of which don't exist anymore. And he discovered a number of things. And there was one in particular that I remember. I think it was a South African tribe, South American tribe, if I remember rightly. And they were eating the necks of animals. And they were consuming the thyroid glands, and he was basically saying how they had no thyroid issues. And if you think about our forebears, they ate every part of an animal. Nothing was wasted, right? We've become very fussy now. Oh, I won't eat the black meat of a chicken, or whatever it is. Whereas they were eating the organs, the glands, and such like. And so there's no doubt they were consuming the hormones that were coming out of those glands, and probably the peptides as well, and other aspects of it. So yes, I think if you eat glands or specific types, in this case of meats, you will be receiving certain peptides. There's no question of that. It's just the old story that if you take the supplement, you are, of course, getting a much more condensed.
Let's go through some of the actual organ systems. So we were talking about thyroid in particular. So can you give me a little bit of, because it's one that I'm specifically looking to get for mum, because of the modulatory side of it. Does that tell me a little bit about thyrogen, I think it's called?
Yeah. It's absolutely right. So it's a gene switch for thyroid. As we've described, it's a bioregulator. So if folks are low in thyroid, it will raise them up. But if they're too high in thyroid, it will lower them down. But let's also bear in mind that if you're in the normal zone, it'll do nothing for you. It's not going to force the issue. Bodybuilders don't get very excited about these things because in the example of testosterone, they want to have a superlogical level. Won't happen.
No.
But normal folks who, especially aging folks who want to say, I want to maintain a good healthy level, this is where they really come into their own with this safety profile where I'm not saying you become laissez-faire in your attitude. And as you pointed out earlier, Lisa, you should always be working with a health professional, know something about what you're doing, but you don't have to be quite so scared about them as you would do if you were using injections, hardcore drugs, and various hormones, of course. So that's the good news. One thing to point out, if you haven't got the gland or the tissue, it ain't going to work.
Right. So if you've had your thyroid removed,
people out there who've had their thyroids removed, and so they're going to have to go on the thyroid hormone. There's no choice for those folks. And the other thing to bear in mind is if you are taking hormones, drugs for your thyroid, in this case, you should, and then you go on to the peptide as well, then monitor yourself extra closely. Because obviously if you're still putting those hormones in at the same level all the time, almost certainly you're going to have to bring them down.
Gotcha.
And possibly even come off them. I have seen that in some cases. So just be aware of that.
When it comes to Hashimoto's, where the body's attacking its own thyroid tissue, would the bioregulator there help there? The thymus, the thyroid bioregulator help there?
They do, although you've got to be more cautious that's the one possibly area, autoimmune diseases, you've got to be more cautious in your approach. In other words, you don't rush on to a high dose.
Talked about the thyroid one. Tell me about the thymus. No, let's go for the pineal gland, because that is the one that's up top, most important, should be in most of the protocols.
Absolutely. Well, what we're seeing is, I think I alluded to it earlier, we're seeing people increase their own endogenous production of melatonin, and we're also, with its consequential benefits, and we're also seeing increases in telomere length. And I think that's primarily down to the pineal gland. Now, Bill Lawrence is currently writing and putting together a new PowerPoint where he's going to talk about how these different peptide bioregulators are causing organ regeneration, which I think is going to be big. Okay, I can't say any more about that yet because I haven't even seen it myself yet. But you know, it's very specific. You can say, well, you've got 21 things here: glands, some tissues, some organs, and they're having an impact on those materials. But they're quite specific. It is easier to explain the glandular ones because, for example, there is an adrenal bioregulator. Now, the adrenal glands produce a lot of hormones. You have your DHEA and your cortisol and your aldosterone and lots of different ones. So you do get quite a cross-balancing when you take the adrenal. And I mention the adrenal because of all the bioregulators I either personally used or I know of people who've used them, that one is one where people talk to me very quickly and say, wow, that made a difference.
Wow. Okay.
I mean, like within a month, they're saying, this is a real difference here. Of course, I've got people who do their before and after tests. They take their testosterone before and they take their testosterone after. And, you know, we've seen improvements across the board in the majority of people. So it's difficult. You know, when it comes to anti-aging, people are, what's the best single thing you can do? You know, and health is like a pyramid. I always think of health as a pyramid. If you've got to do the basics, you've got to have a base to the pyramid, right? So if you got to be eating decently, you got to be exercising okay, you got to be de-stressing. You know, if you're not doing those things, what's the point in trying to put any more material on top? You know, none of this is an excuse to eat McDonald's every day and have 14 pints of beer.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
It doesn't fix that. You know, I'm not saying you can't have a little bit of excess here and there. I mean, that's, you know, you've got to be doing the basics.
Yep.
So once you've got your house in order, as it were, the base, now you start building on it. You could really start seeing some spectacular results. We've
gone through the pineal, the adrenal, the thymus, the ovary one. Tell me about the ovary one. As someone who's middle of menopause, is this going to slow things down?
Yeah. First of all, back to what we said earlier, doesn't do anything for men because they haven't got any ovaries, right? And same way the testes one doesn't work for women because they haven't got any testes. So just be aware of that. And the prostate is the only other one that is not going to work in ladies, obviously. But the ovary one appears to have a balancing factor on both estrogens and progesterone. Okay. And I think the progesterone side of it is really important because during menopause, estrogens, 3 principal estrogen, I know there's breakdowns of that, but you've got estriol, which is the weakest one. Dr. Jonathan Wright reckons the average, if that's the right term to use, woman produces 90%. It's the anti-carcinogenic mild estrogen. Then you've got estradiol, which is about 7% of the average woman's production. And then you've got estrone, which is 3%. Those go into decline. And you can often see a lady at the other end of menopause perhaps producing 60 or 70% less of those hormones, okay? But with progesterone, they often go to
90-something%,
even lower, even 0.
Wow.
Okay? Yet many doctors, even those who believe in HRT or NHRT, natural hormone replacement therapy, I wouldn't say they do, but the ones that do regular HRT often ignore progesterone.
Yes, you must be on progesterone if you're going to be on estrogen.
If the ladies want to get into this out there, get the books of Dr. John Lee, who he had 2 books, What Your Doctor Won't Tell You About Menopause. They were both called. So that is a really good insight into this.
What's your take on spermidine? And, do you think that should be part of a good regime?
Yeah, I mean, everybody's regime is different. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm not talking about the basics, not drinking clean water and eating. We should all take that for granted. But in terms of the next level of the pyramid, the additional level, shall we say, it depends what you want to do. Everything in life comes down to cost and convenience, doesn't it?
Yeah.
How inconvenient, how costly, you make the choice. But spermidine is getting a lot of people excited. Principally, I think, although I've heard the ladies say better skin, better hair, better nails, I think principally because it's action to improve autophagy, which is the natural cleaning of cells. I'm a big fan of Bill Falloon. Bill Falloon is the founder of the Life Extension Foundation in America. Bill also runs the Age Reversal Network. You can go and find it online, of course. And he's trying to get people together to go into these clinical trials where for the first time, multiple things will be used. Not necessarily drugs, could be supplements. And he's got and I'm going to feature it in our Aging Matters magazine, maybe the next one, but fairly soon, hopefully this year anyway, where he's got a thing called the stair-step approach to biological age control. So he's got several steps, and the steps have a different terminology. So I do a couple of the early ones. You've got activate AMPK, right? You've got a second step, which would be improve autophagy, right? You have a third step, which would be mTOR. You have another step, which would be reduce senescent cells, actually removing dead cells from the body. So what I would suggest is that spermidine has a very prominent place on one of those biological steps. NAD is one of his steps. Improve your NAD level.
Yep. We do a lot of that as well.
Guys are NMN, and there are things as well, of course, but that's the supplement.
Big on NMN.
Yes. So I think spermidine is on one of those steps as a very prominent supplement.
Yeah, and so autophagy is the getting rid of, it's the recycling sort of process of getting rid of damaged cells and stuff. And this is so critical, and it actually hits, you know, so many of the hallmarks of aging, spermidine. So I'm really excited about it as you know, everything from immunity to cardiovascular to, you know, to skin, hair, and all of that sort of thing. Plus getting rid of these, you know.
So I look at it like pruning.
You know, you prune out the bad stuff.
If you're into gardening, if you don't deadhead your roses, they're not going to grow as well, are they?
Yeah, exactly.
And so autophagy and the removal of senescent cells is kind of like our pruning.
Yep.